My name's Joe Harris. I'm Professor of French and Early Modern Comparative Literature at Royal Holloway, University of London. I'm currently finishing a book project provisionally entitled The Misanthrope's Progress, Hating Humanity in the Age of Reason. And I'm looking at the figure of the misanthrope, the hater of humanity, of people, in a period roughly from the late Renaissance up to the turn of the 19th century, with a particular focus on the 17th and 18th centuries. The archetypal figures of misanthropy in the period are Tymon of Athens, who Shakespeare wrote a not very successful or popular play about in about 1606, and Moliere's play Le Misanthrope, the misanthrope or misanthropist, from 1666. And between the two of them, well, they stand as sort of figureheads for different models of hatred of humanity. Tymon, according to the ancient Greek myth, he's a semi-mythical figure, apparently based in reality, but we're not quite sure, retreated from Athens after being fleeced by his supposed friends and being bankrupted by them, and went off to live in the desert, in the wilderness or a forest in different versions of the work, shunning all of humanity and shouting abuse at anyone who came near, throwing stones and rocks at them. Moliere's version, however, is a far more urbane, socially adept form of misanthrope who stays within a society that he professes to hate. Shakespeare makes Tymon into a tragic figure, someone who dies by the end of the play. It's never quite made clear what causes him to die, but his hatred of the world seems to come in waves, expanding until he ends up hating all of humanity, well, not just humanity, but hating the whole cosmos and seeing that the entire universe is corrupt and debased and savage. Molière, on the other hand, makes the misanthrope into a figure of comedy, turning the misanthrope into a hypocritical figure who hates society but is still nonetheless too attached to society to fully to leave it entirely. So what Molière does is he sunders two moments which are basically contemporaneous in Shakespeare's play: the character's transformation into a misanthrope and his final decision to leave society altogether. So it's only right at the end of the play that Moliere's character leaves society definitively. Now, what these two plays have in common is they end with, or at least they chart the progression of someone out of society. Now, by the 18th century, ideals of sociability and society, companionship, friendship, sensibility, intersubjectivity, we might say, become a lot more important. And we see lots of works going in the other direction, starting with characters who have abandoned society and living remotely, cut off from society, being brought back into society. Their misanthropy is progressively dismantled or disproved, cured in certain ways. And so these works show that the misanthropic character, well, they trace their reconciliation to society. And it's fascinating that various writers, about a century, pretty much a century after Moliere's play first emerges, various people write sequels to it, in which, in certain cases at least, Alceste, the main character, is progressively brought back into having some sort of sympathy and friendship to humanity and ending up marrying someone. So they offer a degree of closure to Moliere's original play, which, although it was a comedy and we're expecting a happy ending of marriage, doesn't, well, it delegates that marriage to some of the secondary characters, and the main character disappears. So it's a very bleak sort of comedy. Whereas these later works try to give it a happy ending, which wasn't there in the original work. And one of the things that really fascinates me, particularly from the perspective of the theatre, is that misanthropy doesn't seem to fit comedy or tragedy as a genre. Moliere's comedy is so much darker and more serious than many of his other comedies, his one on Le Misanthrope. And Shakespeare's tragedy is actually one of his most sort of satirically biting tragedies as well. And so there seems to be something within misanthropy as a topic that makes it not fit neatly into any particular genres. And that might help to explain why it's then at the very end of the 18th century, when you have a new dramatic genres being explored that are neither tragic nor comic, that suddenly misanthropy starts to flourish. And we've got writers such as Schiller, Kotzebue, the Marquis de Sade, and various other people writing sequels, as I mentioned, to Moliere's play, who all start to produce a flurry of works between about 1788 and 1794 involving misanthropy, and it seems that there's a very interesting tension there that I'm trying to work out. So one of the main things that's really been fascinating me throughout this project is trying to work out what it is about misanthropy, which means that it can't be neatly pigeonholed into any particular dramatic genre. What it is that makes it such a complex and rich subject matter that it can't be neatly assigned to tragedy or comedy.